Hey everyone, and welcome to what is going to be the first of our series of content videos for Engine 32 Studios this year. If you don't know, my name is Devlin. I am the studio lead. So I think I will be in all of these videos, and I'll commit to providing some form of video of the studio content that we cover in each week by the end of the week. So that weekend, we will release some video. I don't know if it's going to be in this sort of sit-down format every time. We'll see. But this time I decided to just sit down and do this because I felt that this is more effective probably than the recording that I tried to do live during the studio. So that's what we're gonna do this time. So in the actual studio for week one, what we did first is we went through and kind of described the course and outlined the course, the projects, the goals of the course, what we're going to be doing in studio, stuff like that. And then we also did a personas activity. I'm not going to cover any of that stuff in this video because these things are just things that were probably good in person, but for the video, I don't think it's so important. I think the main thing for Studio One is understanding how to use Fusion 360. So what I'm gonna do is just provide you as much information as I think will be helpful for an introduction to this software if you haven't used it before, or if you need a refresher, whatever the case may be. So first things first, I want to point out this this sketching activity, this drawing that we showed during the studio this week. This is actually generated from Fusion. So at the end of the day, when you've designed out your project and you've got like a series of parts for your project, this is kind of where you'll probably end up if you need to create documentation. You'll be doing something like this. So Fusion can actually create these drawings and dimension them. And so that's really useful as a final kind of clean result that Fusion can give you for your project. I'm not going to talk about how to create these drawings, but I just want you guys to know this is something that Fusion can do. And we're going to go over everything about how to create these objects so that you can get some sort of polished, finished result like this for documentation purposes or manufacturing purposes, because a lot of times you need a detailed dimension sheet when you go off to manufacture parts. So yeah, that's what we're going to go over this time. So in the studio, there were some functions you probably got to follow along with, which is great. And then there are others that you probably didn't. So in this video, what I hope you'll do is kind of follow along in Fusion as I walk through all of these things. Even the things that you might have already done in studio, I would just do them again and get some more practice, but whatever you want to do with this video, it's totally up to you guys. It's just a resource for you. But yeah, without going on too long, I'm just going to go ahead and jump into Fusion here. So first things first, when you open Fusion, it'll probably look something like this. I probably have a slightly different version of Fusion than you do. I think there might be a grid for you in this area. Don't worry about any of that stuff. That's not super important. What is important is that you have some sort of browser window over here with whatever team or whatever team name you gave yourself at the beginning, and if you're in other teams, which you probably aren't at this point, then you can click on those there. And then there's a list of projects. So you guys may not have anything in here yet. You certainly will. But this is where all of your projects are going to be stored in Fusion if you choose to use the cloud-based storage, which I think everyone does because Fusion is cloud-based. So that's kind of like your data browser panel, and I'm actually just going to close that out so we have more space here. So, but if you want to bring that back, you can just hit this icon and show the data panel. And I'm going to close that. Okay, so first things first, when we open up Fusion, we need to create a sketch. That's kind of the first step in any design. We need to create some sort of a starting point in 2D. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come up to this plus button in the top left here. And you can see when I hover over it, it says create sketch, and then it shows me a drop down with all sorts of information and images about what this command does. So that's super useful. If you ever forget what something does in Fusion, you can usually kind of figure it out just by hovering over it, and it'll kind of explain it to you. The other thing you can do is anytime you get stuck, I would just start looking stuff up, because there's a lot of great videos and other documentation about Fusion out there. This is a very commonly used software, along with some other Autodesk products and some non-Autodesk products that kind of do similar things. So whenever you get stuck, just look up, how do I do X thing in Fusion, and you'll probably get something pretty good that'll describe whatever you're trying to do. So that's first step. We're gonna click that plus button, and then you can see I've got this grid and I've got these different planes here, and I can hover over them and it'll show me how my sketch will be oriented depending on which one I choose. So I like to choose the XY plane. That's usually what I do. So I'll pick this bottom plane, but you can actually pick any of them. And in fact, no matter what you select, you can always change it later, which I will describe later in the video. It has to do with this view cube up here in the top right. So you can always change your view and how you define different views, top, front, right side, etc. And then your home position as you go. So I'm just gonna click this bottom plane for now, okay? And so now you can see it's opened up this view, this sketch view. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over to the create panel. So this is gonna be all my main functions where I create two-dimensional objects, okay? And then everything aside from this is going to be how do I constrain things, how do I actually dimension tools and create, but yeah, how do I constrain things other than dimensioning? How can I modify things? You know, if I want like a rounded edge, I can do a fillet in 2D. There's also a fillet option in 3D. So there's a create panel here. There's also a create panel in 3D. There's just different options for each one. So in 2D, in sketch mode, we've got a lot of options. If you click the drop down, you'll get even more. So you can see line, and then it provides you a keyboard shortcut as well, L. Some of them may not have keyboard shortcuts, but a lot of them do. So C for this circle, and then there's lots of different options even within, you know, something like as simple as a rectangle or a circle. Lots of different ways to create different objects. You can kind of just hover over them and play around with these different options. We'll go through some of these ones later on as we work through. But what I'm gonna start off with is just a rectangle. So I'm gonna hover over this, and I'm going to go to center rectangle right here, okay? So I'm just gonna click somewhere, just like you probably saw in Studio, and I'm gonna create a rectangle. So all I did is I'm just clicking somewhere on the page. Let me go back to center so that I can show you this. So I'm just clicking somewhere on the page. I click once, I move my cursor out, and then I click again, and that creates my rectangle. So if you wanna get out of this rectangle tool, just hit escape, and you'll be out of it, okay? So now I'm gonna actually delete this one. I don't really want it. So I'm gonna highlight it and hit delete, okay? So now, first things first, I have this rectangle. You can see it's blue right now, which means that it's not fully constrained. So the first step in constraining something is going to be to dimension it. So that's what I'm gonna do first. I'm gonna come over to the dimension tool. You can see I hover over it. It gives me information just like everything else. It also provides me a keyboard shortcut, which is D. So I can hit D or click on the dimension, and there we go. So by default, what I'm getting is millimeters, and I'm okay with that for the purposes of this video, but I'm gonna show you guys how to change that as well in a minute here. So all I'm doing, I just click aside, drag out the dimension, click again to place it, and then I type in whatever my dimension is and hit enter. That's kind of the process here. So you can see I did that with the 50 millimeters. And then what I'm gonna do is something called parametric dimensioning, which is where I sort of reference dimensions based on each other. So you can see if I hover over this 50 millimeter dimension, you can see it's assigned it a label, which is D1. So it says D1 colon 50 millimeters. So if I want this to be a square, then I want this side to also be 50 millimeters. So instead of typing 50 millimeters, I'm just gonna type D1 here, because as we see, D1 refers to this dimension, which is 50 millimeters. So now the advantage of this is, hey, I decide later, I don't want this to be 50 millimeters anymore. I want it to be 60 millimeters. Now it updates everything else in the drawing automatically. So this can save you, it seems so simple now, like, oh, who cares? But this can actually save you a ton of time if you get into some really complicated design where you're reusing a ton of dimensions. You don't want to waste time having to go back and re-update everything. So as many times as you can use parametric dimensions, I would recommend doing that. And there are some times when you can't, but as often as you can. So if I didn't want this in millimeters, then you can come over here to document settings in this browser panel right here. and I hit the drop down on that, and then you can see units is right there. So I can change this by clicking on that little pencil. I hover over this and click on that little pencil thing, and you can see it says change active units. And then I get this dialog box that pops up so that I can change it. So I'm gonna keep it in millimeters, but if I hit the drop down, you can see there's lots of different options that you can choose from. And then, if I change it to meters, I can hit okay, and so on. So I'm not changing it, so I'm just gonna hit cancel. Okay, so now we've dimensioned our rectangle and we know how to change units and all this. But as I said before, if it's not fully constrained, that drawing is going to be this sort of blue color, and you can see it's still blue. So what Fusion wants is it wants us to reference the location of this object to the origin in some way. So I'm just gonna place this thing at the origin. It's actually not so important where exactly it is, in this case at least. So what I'm gonna do is show you some constraints now so that we can get this thing to the center. Of course, you could use the dimension tool to also do this the same way. If I grab the dimension tool and I click the center point and I click here, I can dimension it just like that. So there are lots of different ways to do things in Fusion. There's no one right way, but just to give you guys some options here, I'm going to show you this tool. So let me undo that for a minute. Okay, so in dimensions, you can see I'm gonna hit the drop down here. And we've got a lot of different dimensions here, much more than I can possibly go over in this video. But you can see they give you kind of this image here that sort of shows you what they do. Some of them are pretty self-explanatory, like parallel. Just click on two lines, it makes them parallel to each other. Perpendicular, same idea, click on two lines, makes them perpendicular, etc. Fix makes whatever object you click fixed in a location. So like if I click fix and hit the center point, now everything's fully constrained. You want to try to avoid doing stuff like this though, because in my opinion at least, this can kind of hide problems that you have in your design. So I like to try to avoid that one when I can, but there's lots of options. I would encourage you to play around with this, read through the descriptions that Fusion has, watch videos, etc. Just start doing stuff in Fusion and you'll get these things. What I'm gonna do right now is go over coincident, because that's what I'm gonna use, like I mentioned before. So coincident basically lets you constrain a point to a line or a point to another point. So for me in this case, I wanna constrain this point to this point. So I'm gonna move this thing to the center just like this. Okay, and then I'm gonna hit escape so I can get out of it. Another way to do things, if I'm on coincident constraint and now I wanna do something else, I can right click and hit okay, and that'll bring me out of coincident constraint. Okay, so now the outline is black. You can see it's changed color. That tells me as a visual indication that this thing is fully constrained. So now we're good with this. So we've created our first sketch in Fusion, which is good. So now we're done with that. What we need to do is come over here and say finish sketch. Okay, so now I'm back where I was when I started, when I first opened Fusion. So now I'm in sort of my 3D view mode, although I just have a 2D sketch for now, so it may not be so obvious. But you can see that create panel has now changed. I have a bunch of 3D options in here now. And then the modify panel has also changed in the same way. I have a bunch of sort of 3D modifications that I can make. And now I have a few other options that weren't in Sketch. And we'll talk about some of those later on. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to click the home button. And you can see that thing is going to always go to whatever this point is. And I can specify what I want that point to be. So if I right click on this point and I go to set current view as, or set current view as home, you can set any point to home. So let's say I don't want this to be home anymore. I want this to be home. I can right click, go set current view as home, and I can either do fixed distance, which just means that it's this, whatever you see on your screen right now, when you click home, this is what it's gonna be. If you do fit to view, then as you build your object, it'll just scale it for you, but it'll still be in that orientation. So you can choose your home position. I'm gonna leave it at this because this is fine for me. But you can also do the same thing for the top and the front and the right side. All those views can be reset, or at least top and front can. And that'll kind of set everything else accordingly. So if I decide I don't want this view to be the top anymore, I want it to be the front, then I can go to, I can right click on it and then go to set current view as, and I can hit, front or top. So if I decide I want this to be the top now, I go here and hit top. So I'm actually fine with everything, so I'm gonna leave that alone. But just a quick note on how you can reset your views. Also, the view cube can let you view things in different orientations, so you can drag corners and kind of move things around. You can click on faces like I was doing before. You can rotate things by clicking on these arrows, which will show up if you hover over the view cube. And then you can always go home by pressing the home button. So just know that's how you can kind of navigate Fusion. Okay, and then of course you can move around like just using your trackpad or your mouse, and you can zoom in and out. Okay, so let's create our first 3D object. So we're gonna come over back to the Create tab now, as you might imagine, and I'm gonna hit the drop down on this just to show you some of the different options that are in here. So once again, hover over things, check it out. We're gonna go over quite a few of these, but there's lots of other options that we're not gonna go over. So I'm gonna do extrude. So extrude is going to be one of the simplest options that we have to create 3D objects in Fusion. It's also one of the most common things that you'll probably do. So what we can see here is once I clicked on extrude, I got this dialog box that's opened up for me. So now Fusion has sort of been smart and it's figured out, okay, you only have one closed loop in your design right now. So it's automatically selected it because I have no other options. But if it didn't, so I'm just gonna hit X on this, and let's say it didn't select it for you, you can just hit this and that's it. So just make sure you're on select and then hit the profile that you want, and that's it. So if Fusion automatically selects a profile you don't want, you can also clear that out just like I did right there. Okay, so now there's a lot of different options in here. So first things first, you have this arrow. So in Fusion, you can kind of drag objects and sort of get an idea of what things look like without actually specifying dimensions in here. So that's one thing you can do. You can do that. And you can see if I pull this thing down, then the distance right here goes negative, okay? So that's something to keep in mind. That's how you specify things. So something, you extrude something and it's going the wrong direction, then you can just make it negative and it'll go the other direction, the opposite direction. Okay, so in this case, I want this thing to be positive and I'm gonna set this to D1 too, because I want this to be a cube. So I'm gonna set it to D1, and then there's an operation here. In this case, we're gonna say new body, but there are other options as we continue to make our design more complex. There are options like join and cut, which aren't so relevant as we create our first body, but we'll come back to that and they'll become more relevant later. So just keep that in mind. That operation is going to come back and be important. Okay, so for now we're gonna hit okay. And now we've got a cube. Okay, cool. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you guys revolve. So once again, we're gonna go back through the same sort of steps. We're gonna have a sketch, and then we're gonna come out of that sketch and we're gonna revolve it. I'm using this create tab right here, revolve. Okay, but first we need to know, well, what are the requirements for revolve? So let's just click on revolve. I could tell you what it is, but I can also show you. So what revolve requires is you need a profile. So that's the thing that is being revolved. And then you need an axis. So that's the thing that the profile revolves about. Okay, so those are the two things that we need. Right now, we don't really have any of those things. So we need to create them now using Sketch. So what I wanna do is have a cylinder on top of this cube. Now I could do that with extrude, but we're trying to learn more tools, so I'm gonna do it with revolve. So if I wanna have a cylinder in the middle or on top of this cube here, using revolve, then what I need to have is a sketch plane that is right here where I'm moving my cursor right now. I need to have some sort of sketch plane right in the middle of my cube so that I can draw my profile, so that I can revolve around, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna come over to construct now. So here's another very useful tool that you have for 3D. So I hit the drop down on this, I'm gonna go to offset plane. This is probably one of the most common types of planes that you'll use, so that's why I'm choosing to focus on this one. But again, tons of options in Fusion, okay? So the best thing you can do is develop your own preferences by playing around in Fusion. So this is my preference, pretty common tool, but again, play around with it make stuff. Yeah, and you'll learn a lot from the software. So first things first, I need to select a reference plane. So offset plane is kind of what it sounds like, right? And I'll go back to the drop down even and just hover over this so that you can see the image that it gives you. So I'm going to click on a surface or another plane, and then I'm going to specify a distance that I want to create a new plane, you know, some distance from the original plane. It's going to be parallel to the original plane, okay? So, yeah, exactly what it sounds like. So it's just offset from the original plane. So now my plane is going to be this, because I want to go right in the middle of this cube. The distance that I want to go is going to be, so I made this thing D1 millimeters wide, so I need to go D1 over 2 millimeters to get to the center of the cube. So that's what I'm going to type, D1 over 2. Now my plane has gone the wrong way. So now we're going to do what I was just talking about a minute ago, which is make this thing negative so we can flip it around. So I'll just say negative D1 over 2. And there we go, perfect, we're right in the center. Okay, so I'm gonna hit okay. And just to really drive this point home, I'm also going to go back into Sketch. So this is another thing you can do if you need to edit things. You can see your different sketches over in the browser panel. And then there's also a timeline down here in the bottom left. So that's very important if you want to edit things later. So if I decide I want to extrude this to a different distance, I can just double click on this and I open up my extrude dialog box again, and I can edit it and hit OK and save those changes. I'm going to come back to the first sketch that we made, and I'm going to decide that I want this to be 80 now. And I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to say finish sketch, and look at that. Perfect. Fusion has updated everything for us. So this, once again, just to drive home the point about making everything parametric, because now it's updated everything for me. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sketch on that plane we just made. So I'm going to go to create sketch, and I'm going to click on this plane. Okay. So now we are in another 2D sketch situation, and we're on that plane, although it may not be apparent that we're on the plane, because remember that plane is in the middle of the cube. So that's sort of inconvenient. So let's say I draw a line right in the middle of this cube now. Well, now I've got this big thing kind of in the way. It may not be so convenient. Yes, I can see the line, but it may not be ideal. So I'm going to delete this because I don't actually need that. That was just to make a point. And I'm going to actually project the outline of this cube onto the plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to create, and I'm going to go to project/include, and then I'm going to hit project. So the keyboard shortcut for that is P, if you don't want to go through all those clicking steps. So I'm just selecting the edges around my cube here, and you can see it's keeping track of the number of things I select here. So there we go. So I've selected everything, and then I'm going to hit OK. And you can see what it's done is it's just outlined everything right here. So now the beauty of this is I can come into bodies here, because remember we made a new body when we made this 3D body. I can come over to body and I can turn the visibility off. So you can see the visibility, for example, is off on sketch 1 already. We're gonna do the same thing for this body. We're just gonna turn that off. So that's that little eye icon. You can kind of click it on and off. So now I don't have to see that body in my way, is basically the point here. Okay, so that's just kind of a nice thing that you can do. And also now I have a reference to dimension off of. So I'm going to first draw in my axis, and I'm going to intentionally put it in a random location so that I can dimension it and go over that again. So I've drawn in my line. This is going to be my axis that I revolve my profile around. So now, as you might guess, I want this dimension to be D1 over 2. But let's say I forgot that this was D1, and I don't want to go back into my sketch and have to figure out what D1 is. Okay, so in that case, the other thing I can do is I can go to my dimension tool, and I can click here and here, and I can create what's called a driven dimension. And so in that case, I'm going to hit create driven, and you can see it's in parentheses. It's in parentheses because you can't change it. So it's over constrained, you cannot change this dimension, but now you have a nice reference here. So like, let's say I forgot that this dimension was called D1. So now if I hover over this, it's given it a new label. So it's called D6, and it'll change if I update D1, because it's just referenced to these two sides. It's not something that I actually dimensioned myself. So, or it's not a new dimension, I guess I should say. So I'm gonna grab this, and then I'm gonna click on this, so you can see now it's D6, and D6 over 2 is what I want, because I want it to be right in the center. Perfect, okay. So now I'm gonna make my profile. So to make my profile, I'm gonna come back to the rectangle tool. This time I'm just gonna do a 2-point rectangle, keep things simple. I'm gonna grab one of these corners, and I'm just gonna drag this to a random location, and then hit escape. Okay, so now I've got my profile, but I need to dimension it, of course, and clean it up. So I'm gonna go back to my coincident constraint, and I'm gonna click this point, and I'm gonna click that line. So now my axis is constrained right here, and I want this line to match up here. So I'm gonna constrain this to this intersection point. There we go. So now the only thing I need to dimension is the height on this thing, and I'm just going to make it the same as this. Okay, and of course you can enter any height that you want. If you want it to be something totally unrelated to D1, then you can just type in, you know, whatever number, you know, 90. You can type that in, that's fine. Okay, so now I'm gonna finish this sketch. So I've got my axis right here, and I've got my profile right here. So we're gonna go to finish, and I'm gonna go to home, and I'm gonna turn that body back on. Okay, so now we can actually see what's going on. All right, so now I'm gonna go into Revolve, and I'm gonna hit this profile, and now I need to come in and select my axis. So I'm gonna go to select under axis right here, and I'm gonna select this line that we created a minute ago. And now we can see it's revolved everything, and I can kind of see a preview of my cylinder. So there's some different options in here, as with extrude. So there's an extent. You can see I'm on partial right now. You can also go full, in which case you won't be able to specify an angle. Right now I'm just 360, but let's say I didn't want to go 360 degrees around, I can go to 180, something like that, and so on. Okay, in this case I do want it to be 360 though, so I'm going to change that. Okay, other options, you know, the direction once again, and then operation becomes a little more significant here. So I'm just going to show you guys what happens when I choose join and what happens when I choose new body. So what I'm going to do first is I'll leave it on join. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. So now what's going to happen is under this body tab, it's just going to be body 1. It will not create a new body. This cylinder that I made will become fused with this cube. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. All right, so there we go. We've got our object here. And now what I'm going to do to illustrate the significance of what we've just done is go up to this modify tab and use this shell feature. So if I hover over shell, you can kind of see exactly what it's going to do. It's just going to remove material depending based on, you know, what face I choose. So I'm going to click on a face on an object. It's going to remove that face, and then it's going to create sort of a shell thickness around the rest of that object. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to choose to remove this top face right here. And then inside thickness, so that's your wall thickness, I'm going to say 3 millimeters. And I'm going to go to OK. Okay, so now I've created this shell feature. So now I'm going to use my view cube so you can see what actually happened. So let's see. Okay, so there we go. So we can see my shell has shelled out this entire object, the cylinder and the cube below. So it's sort of shelled out this whole thing. The whole thing is now hollow. Now, if I had selected new body when I did my revolve just a second ago, this wouldn't have happened. It would have just shelled this cylinder. So depending on what you want to do, that's how you can decide whether I want to do join or new body. So if I want the shell or my modify to apply to both of these bodies, then that's fine, just choose join. And if I don't, then choose new body. So I'm going to undo this shell, and I'm going to come back into revolve using my timeline, and I'm going to change it to new body. Okay, so I'm going to hit OK. But now you can see under bodies, now I have a whole separate body. And if I hover over that, and highlight this, you can see they're actually separate, okay? So now I'm gonna go to shell and I'm gonna do the same thing. So I'm gonna click that face, I'm gonna go to 3 and hit okay. So now you can see it did exactly what I just described. It only shelled that top cylinder, that body 2, okay? So that's the difference between join and new body. Okay, so you can see what shell did. That's kind of a bonus feature. I'm actually going to undo that. The other thing is you can come down to the timeline, of course, and delete it. So I right clicked on that shell and just delete. Now that's gone. Okay. So little bonus feature there. And now you can see the difference between new body and join. Okay. So next thing we're going to do is do a little bit more with this modify tab. Okay. So what I'll do is I'm going to go to fillet first. So what this is going to do is it's going to create rounded edges, kind of exactly what it looks like in the icon here. So I'm going to click on an edge here, for example. I'll click on another one here. You can keep on going, however many you want to do. Maybe I want everything to be rounded. If that's the case, I can just go around and click on all of these. And then you need to specify a radius. So I'm going to do maybe 5 millimeters. Okay, so you can see it creates a nice rounded edge here. And there we go, right at 5 millimeters. Okay, so you can also select a corner type. If I had chosen this edge as well, for example, then that would be more relevant. I usually just leave it on this, but depending on what you want this to look like, you can choose different things. Okay, so I'll hit OK and create that feature. Okay, you can see it showing up in my timeline right here. All right, so now I'm going to do chamfer. So very similar. So you can see it's going to create sort of a beveled edge. And you can specify it can be like a nice 45-degree angle, or you can specify different angles using different distances. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to click on this. Same sort of deal as with fillet. First thing I want to do is select, as it's prompting me to do, my edge. So I'm going to select this edge. And now we've got a few different options. So in type, you can go to equal distance, which is what I'm on now. So now let's see. I'm going to change this to, I'm going to do 5 again. Okay, cool. So there we go. You can see what it did. I'm not allowed to change this distance though, because remember I said equal distance. So this distance and this distance are the same. But if I went to 2 distances, then I could change this. You know, let's say I want it to be 10. And you can see what it does. So this distance kind of from here to that edge is 5, and then from the edge to here is going to be 10 in that case. Okay, and then you can also do distance and angle. So kind of is what it sounds like. If I go 45, then that's the same as equal distance, and you can play with that depending on how much you want that taper, what you want the taper angle to be. So there's lots of different options here. Again, corner type, you can play around with that. I'm going to leave it at this. Okay. All right, so there we go. So now we've got our object. We've used a few create features and we've modified it a little bit. So we're starting to get a good idea of how to use Fusion at this point to create objects. So that's good. So now what we're going to do is go over a few more advanced features in Fusion as well, some other things that we can create. So if I go to this drop down, you can see there's all sorts of options, as I said before, that we haven't gone over yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm next going to go over sweep, and I'm just going to let you view that kind of image because I think it's pretty instructive in sort of understanding what it does. But basically you can see it kind of takes a profile. So you have some profile and then you have a path. So in this case, it's got this sort of squiggly path and a circular profile. That's similar to what we'll do in this example. So it's just going to take that profile and it's going to sort of move it along the path and create a 3D object from there. Okay, so I'm going to click on sweep, or actually first we need to set it up. So I guess I will click on it just to show you what it wants. So it's going to want a profile and it's going to want a path, the two things that I was just mentioning before. Okay, so we don't have those yet, so let's create them. So I'm going to cancel that. So first things first, I'm going to create the profile. So for that, I'm going to put the profile on here. So what I'm going to do, our goal with this feature, is to make sort of a sweeped path right here in this sort of shape that I'm showing with my cursor. Okay, so first things first though, we need that profile. So I'm going to click on this face and then I'm going to go to create sketch again, and let's create that profile. So I'm going to go to circle now, and I'm going to click on the center and drag out and place that down. And then I'm going to dimension it, and in this case I'm just going to keep it at 50. So I'm going to switch it up a little bit. So there we go, and I'm going to go to finish sketch. So that's all for that. Okay, so now we've got our profile, we just need our path. So for the path, usually you want the path to be perpendicular to the profile, okay? So now I want that path to be starting right here at the center point, in my case. So I could create another offset plane, but instead of doing that, I'm just going to turn the visibility on for the one that we've already created. So we already have an offset plane right in the middle of here. I'll just turn its visibility back on. So right under construction is where you'll find all of your planes and axes. If you make axes, which we won't go over here, but that's another great thing that you can do. Can be pretty helpful. So I'll turn the visibility on and create a new sketch from there. So create new sketch, and I'm going to just click on plane under construction here. All right, so in this case, once again, I'm going to project. So I can either go through here and find project or just hit P. And then I'm going to select just this. I actually just need this line right here. It's the only thing that I really require in this case. Okay, and then I'm going to turn this body off so it's out of my way. Perfect. Okay, so now we've got that upper line, which is all I need. And we're going to create our path. So I'll start at the center here. If you accidentally click somewhere else, you can constrain it using coincident constraint like we've been doing, but I'll just make it easy and start right at the center and have it auto constrain. And I'm going to create this weird path. Okay. So now I'm going to dimension this. I'm just going to give it random dimensions, not very important for this demo. So we'll go 150 with that. Let's go 130. Okay, cool. So now we've got our path, and it's fully dimensioned, all black outline. And by the way, a good test to see whether things are fully dimensioned, I'm going to get out of dimension now. Good test to see if things are fully dimensioned is to try to grab something and just move it. So I'm grabbing these lines and trying to move them, and they're not moving, which gives me a pretty good indication that they're probably fully constrained. Okay, anyway, I've created my path, so I'm going to go to finish sketch, go home here, and I'll turn these back on. And then I'm going to go home again so it'll zoom and fit to the view properly. All right, so now let's do the sweep. Okay, so let's go to this drop down and hit sweep, and I'm going to select my profile, and then I'm going to select the path. So there's my path. And you can see exactly what it does now. It's going to sweep that profile along that path. Okay. And you can choose different orientation options here. I always do perpendicular. I've never used parallel, but that's an option. In this case, it's impossible for it to be parallel, and you can see it'll give me an error. It will not do it because this is totally perpendicular right here. So it can't be parallel. So yeah, I usually choose parallel, but there are different options, so just be aware of that. And once again, I've got my classic join or new body or cut, which we'll talk about cut later, options, okay? So that's it. So now I'm gonna hit okay, and now we've got our new sweep feature. So that's pretty cool. Okay, so now the next one we're gonna go over is loft. So I'm gonna rotate this around. So what loft does, and I will just go to create and hover over it so you can kind of see the image that Fusion has. So basically, if I have different profiles on different planes, I can sort of join them together using loft. And you can see it's joining two profiles right now, but you can do infinitely many. Okay, so you can create a ton of different planes. You can do 10 planes with different profiles, and you can kind of join them all together. So like if I have a circle on a plane, you know, like this, and then I have a bigger circle, and I have a bigger circle, and then it closes back in, you know, I can create like a shape something like this. Okay, so you can create all sorts of complex shapes, whatever you want to do using loft. You can just join profiles together. That is what loft does. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I will use this as a profile right here. So I've got one profile, I need one more. So what I'm gonna do is create an offset plane based on this plane right here. So I'm gonna go to construct, hit the drop down and go back to offset plane, and I'm gonna hit this as my reference. All right, so for distance, I'm just gonna choose a random distance in this case, let's say 30, okay? And then I'm gonna start a sketch on this plane. So we'll go click on there and then hit start sketch. You can see now I'm oriented and I'm working on the offset plane I just created. So first things first, I need to project this once again. So I just hit P, that's the keyboard shortcut. You can also go through that whole path and get it that way. So I'm gonna click this and hit OK, and now I've got this outline and I have a reference for my sketch. So what I'm gonna do in this case, I'm gonna create a bigger circle so that we can lock that together. So I'm gonna hit the center point, drag out, have a pretty large circle here. We'll dimension it, we'll go, yeah, we'll keep it pretty big, 150. Okay, now I'm gonna hit finish and then go home. There we go. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna rotate this back around because I can't see everything that I need. I'm gonna go to create and loft. And now I need to select my profiles that I want to loft together. So first things first, I can select my first profile. So I'm gonna go in here and select this. Then I need to come into the dialog box here and click this plus button to tell Fusion that I want to select the next profile now. Okay, so hit the plus button, and you can see now it's deselected profile 1, which is good, that's what we want. And now we're going to select our bottom profile. Okay, so you see I had to make 2 clicks there, that's fine, it's the same profile. You can see it's labeled the first one profile 1, the second one profile 2. And if you had another plane below this with another profile, then you could include that. Okay, so you can keep on going however many profiles you need to join. And you can see what it's done. It's just joined them together. And so I can hit OK. Once again, join, new body. Depending on what you want to do, you want to choose those options wisely and then hit OK. All right. So now we've sort of got this like shower head looking feature. This is actually sort of just a random shape, and that's what it's sort of morphed into. But we'll go with it. So this is, we'll call this the shower head here. So the next thing I need is you know, the little grate on the bottom where the water is going to come out. Okay, so this is just kind of an excuse to show you guys some more advanced sketch features. So we're going to create another sketch and create some more features on the bottom of this. All right, so I will select this and go to new sketch again. And there we go. So now I've got a sketch on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few more of these sketch options because we've sort of done some basic ones up here, and you can kind of get the idea with some of these other ones. They're pretty straightforward once you get these few down and you know how to, you know, use Fusion and interact with this UI. Those shouldn't really be a huge problem. So you can see there's also text. That's another good thing you have, but they're all pretty self-explanatory, I think, once you get the first few in the flow of things. Okay, but there are a few down here that are pretty interesting that I want to point out. So we're going to give some more attention to mirror, circular pattern, rectangular pattern. So mirror is the first one I'm going to do. So I'll hover over that. So we don't have a nice image for this, but it kind of does exactly what it might sound like. So basically, if you have a symmetric sketch, you can kind of mirror that sketch over some axis. Okay, so this can be good in very specific situations where you have something, you know, maybe you spent a lot of time on making one half of a symmetric object and you've dimensioned it all out, and then it's like, oh, I need to do the other path. That sucks. I don't want to spend all of this time making the same object that I just made again. So what you can do in that case is you can use mirror and mirror all of those things over a mirror line. Okay, so I'm going to show you how that works. So first things first, I need an object and I need a mirror line. And remember, what I like to do if I forget what I need is just click on mirror and it'll tell you it needs an object and a mirror line. So we'll hit cancel because we don't have either of those things yet, but let's create those. So first things first, actually, let's project this profile. So I'm going to project it. I just hit P. That's how I got there. And I'm going to hit OK. Okay, so there's the project. Now I need a mirror line. So I'm going to create a line right here. And actually, I'll just put it randomly so we can go over a few more constraints. So yeah, I've created sort of a random random line here. So what I actually want this to do is be horizontal. That's what I actually want. So I'm going to use that constraint, so horizontal right here. I'm gonna click on the line, and now it's horizontal. Okay, so that's pretty convenient. And then the other thing I want is I want the line to be coincident with that point right there. So I'm gonna hit coincident and click the line, and then this point. There we go. So now we've used constraints and sort of modified that line to be exactly how we want it. All right, so there's the mirror line. Now we need a feature to mirror. So we need to have our object. I'm gonna make this real simple and just put a circle here, okay? And I'll go ahead and dimension this. Let's do 15. We'll make it a little smaller here. And we'll do, yeah, 25 is fine. I'm gonna do the same thing here. Okay, so this gives me another opportunity to explain some things with dimensions. So you can see in this case, I have a dimension between this point and this point. Well, in that case, I could have this dimension, this horizontal dimension, I could have this vertical dimension, or I could have an aligned dimension that looks like this. Sometimes it can be hard for Fusion to figure out which one you want. So for example, you can see, maybe I'm trying to actually get this horizontal dimension right here, but it keeps on popping up with aligned. So in that case, you can right click, and now you can force Fusion to perform the dimension operation the way that you want. So you can see I've got some options. I've got aligned, vertical, and horizontal. In this case, I want it to be horizontal, but let's do aligned just to show you. So now I can only do aligned. You can see there's no other options, they're just aligned. So if I right click and go to horizontal now it's just horizontal. So that's another nice thing. So I'm gonna create that dimension, and I'm gonna reference this dimension, so I'm just gonna click it. There we go. And now we've created our object. So now we've got everything we need to do a mirror, and you can see actually mirrors right here. So I'm gonna click that, and I'm gonna select my object, and then I'm gonna choose the mirror line. So I'm gonna go to this select here, and I'm gonna choose that mirror line we just made, and you can see it does exactly what you'd probably imagine. It's just gonna flip that and mirror it across that mirror line. Okay, so I could hit okay, and I could do that, but this is just to show you, so I'm actually going to cancel that. Okay, so we're gonna do another thing. So we're gonna go to circular pattern now. That's the next one we'll do. So, similar deal. In this case, we need an object. So we've got our object, we'll select it. And then we need a center point. So let's go and select that. We have a natural center point right there. And cool, there we go. So now you can see we've got some options. We've got distribution, kind of similar to revolve. You can do full, just like revolve, or you can do partial. If I do partial here, you can see I can change the angle. And right here, it's got 180. I want it to be 360, which is the same as full, then I can do that. I can also change the number of different objects that I want, and it'll spread them evenly across whatever distribution you choose. So let's say I want this to be 10. There we go. It spreads out 10 circles evenly across that distribution. Okay, so I can hit OK there, and you can see what it does. So the last one we'll do is rectangular. So I'm actually going to undo that and go to create and rectangular. So now same deal. I'm going to select an object, and in this case, now I just need to provide direction. So I've got two distances that I need to account for here. So what I like to do is I like to just drag this, and it'll give me an idea of what maybe distances I might want. So in this case, I think what we'll do is go 50 and 50 here. Okay. And if I needed them to be over here, you can see that's going to change that to be negative. In this case, that's not the case. So I'm going to keep everything positive, but just keep that in mind. And then I can choose my quantity, depending on what I want that to be. 5 is probably too many. So we'll do 4 in this case. Okay. So it creates a nice grid. So this can be super useful and save you a ton of time if you have repetitive patterns that you need to create. You definitely don't want to be messing around trying to create 1,000 circles. Use this tool, let Fusion do the work for you. So that's kind of the idea with these. So I'm going to hit OK with this one. And this will be sort of our grate on the bottom of the shower head. Okay. So I'm going to go to finish sketch here. And what we'll do is we'll extrude these again, but this time we're going to do a cut extrude. So everything we've done so far has been additive. So what I mean by that is we've created objects, right? We've created more objects as we've gone. In this case, with cut, I'm going to have a subtractive process. So let's see how that works. So I'm going to go to extrude, and I'm going to start selecting all of these things. There's a lot of them. So I'm just going to select, go through and click all of this. And you can see right off the bat in operation, you can see the Fusion is choosing new body for me. That's not what I actually want in this case. So I'm going to go to cut. Okay. So now I'm going to specify a distance here. Let's say 2 millimeters. Okay. So here, I'll bump that up a little bit. So right here, we can see the Fusion is going the wrong way. It's not going into the object. I want to cut back into that profile. So I'm just going to flip the distance once again. -5. There we go. Okay. So now everything's red. I'm not getting any warnings, so we're good to go. And if I hit OK, you can see now it's actually subtracted material. All right. So those are some more advanced sketching options that you have. There are lots more, of course, as I've been saying. And yeah, there's another way to extrude things. Okay, cool. So a few more things that I think are pretty useful in Fusion to go over. So one of them is this inspect tool here. So I hit the drop down on that and go to measure. This can be really helpful for getting rough dimension ideas. If, for example, you import an object into Fusion, let's say you go to Thingiverse for your 3D printing workshop in the BDW, and you download something from Thingiverse as an STL. And then you want to bring that into Fusion and make some modifications to it. So you can do that. So it's going to bring it in as a mesh, and then you can kind of edit things from there. You can turn it into a solid body and edit it. So that's all great, but all of that dimensioning, all of these nice operations here, all of that data is going to be lost. So you can bring the object into Fusion, but you may not have all of this sort of data that you'd have in a native Fusion file. So in that case, what you want to do is maybe measure something. So you can do it in that case. Maybe, you know, I just forgot what the distance is between here and here, and I don't want to go back to my sketch and figure it out. So this tool can kind of save you a little bit of time. So I can just click this, for example. You can see it'll tell me the diameter right here is 80 millimeters. Okay, so that's just a nice tool. You can do lots of things. Let's say I wanted to measure the distance between this line and this line. There we go, 70 millimeters right here. So that's pretty useful, just a nice kind of workflow enhancing tool that you can use. So yeah, so I think that should give you guys a pretty good idea of how to create 3D objects in Fusion. So the best way, as I've been saying, the best way to learn Fusion is to just start making stuff. So that's the thing I would really encourage you to do once you followed along with this tutorial, is just start doing projects in Fusion, projects that require Fusion. We have 3D printers. They get overused a little bit, so I don't want to encourage you to start just like making a ton of stuff, but that is a great way to learn Fusion, is to make objects and go 3D print them, because that's like the easiest way that you can create your object in real life and get an idea of how to design for manufacturability, for example. So yeah, so that's another thing that you can do. So there's lots of great things you can do with Fusion. Just start doing them, and when you get stuck, Google it. Okay, so there is one more thing, or a few more things I should say, that I do want to show you. So let's first save this. That's the first thing, is how do I save my file? So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save. And now you can see you can choose different locations. I'm just going to let it save to the cloud, which is what it's doing right now by default. So I'm going to say this is Studio One Demo. Okay. So there we go. So now I've saved this object. Okay. So I'm going to open up my data panel again, and you can see got lots of stuff in here, as I said before. The other thing about Fusion is that I can create multiple parts and assemble them together. So this is really important. You don't want to like have some super complicated project with moving parts and have it all in one part like this. That's not great. So, and it also will not work out when you try to manufacture that part. So what I'm going to do is show you how to assemble things. So if you go to File again, I'm going to go to New Design. and I'm gonna just assemble something random. So I'm gonna choose this thing, this board adapter. Not important what that is, but we'll assemble it. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna right click this thing and hit insert into new design, or into current design. Okay, so now it's loading it. Okay, there we go, perfect. So I'll hit okay, and now we've got that object in this design. So now first things first, this is my first object. This will be the bottom of this. This is what we're ultimately gonna make. You can kind of see what it is right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ground this object. So this object will not be able to move. That's kind of what I'm trying to say here. So I'm gonna click here and I'm gonna right click, and then I'm gonna go to ground. So what that's gonna do is it's not going to allow me to move this thing anymore, okay? So now I'm gonna go to another object and I'm gonna insert that into this design. So we'll say insert, and there we go. So you can see in this case, it's very convenient. It's opened it exactly where I actually do want it, but that's not really the point of this demo. So I'm just gonna move it out of the way and show you how to move things wherever you want them. So there we go. So let's say it opened like that. Okay, so now you can kind of see what I want. I want this surface to be flush with this. So I want to constrain this circle to this circle on the bottom. That's what I actually want to do. So to do that, I'm going to go to joint, and you can see now I need to select two things that I want to join together. So you can see the first thing is it's requiring me to select this object. So I'm going to select that point right there. And then I'm going to come over here to my other object and select where I want that point to join to. So I'm going to select here, and you can see it's going to move it over and join those together. So now if I go to motion, there's lots of different options here. So I'm doing a rigid constraint, which means it can't move in any direction, X, Y, and Z. It'll be fixed. It won't be able to rotate, any of that. But you can allow different amounts of motion. So instead of rigid, I could do slider. And you can see what that does. It's going to allow you to slide the object up and down. So you can kind of just click through these and see what each of them do. There's lots of different things. Planar, you can see, does something totally different, allows you to rotate it still, and so on. Okay, so there's lots of them. I'm going to do rigid, and you can see it's showing me that it's not going to move, and I'm going to hit OK. But there's lots of different options in here. Yeah, lots of different options for assembly. Okay. So now I've got my objects. That is quick crash course on how to assemble things in Fusion. So obviously, as you create, giant projects with a ton of different parts, you're going to want to be able to put them together. This is how you can do that in Fusion. Personally, I don't love the assembly options in Fusion. I actually use Autodesk Inventor. So there are other softwares that might be better for assembling things. It's up to you though, up to personal preference. In this class, we use Fusion. So there you go. That's how you assemble things in Fusion. Okay, cool. So now, for a quick moment, I'm just going to come back into this design and show you how to export different things so that you can manufacture your parts in the BDW, for example, or on other machines. So let's say I've got this part and I want to 3D print it, which, by the way, you should not 3D print this part because I've got all sorts of overhangs, and these are things that you'll learn when you take the BDW training for 3D printing. But let's say, hypothetically, I actually had an object that was good to go for 3D printing and I want to 3D print it. So in that case, I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Export. So now in Export, usually for 3D printing, I want a file type like STL or STEP. So I'm going to go to the drop down and I'm going to go to STL. You can see STEP is right above it right here. So there we go, there's STL. Also, you can export to different programs. So for example, I use Autodesk Inventor. You can see because Fusion is another Autodesk product, there's some compatibility there. I can export things to Autodesk Inventor. I might lose some information, but it's still pretty convenient. You can export it as that type. So in this case, we're going to stick with STL, and then I can hit export. And when I do that, you can see it's going to pop up with this job status box, and it'll show you when things are done. So it'll usually take a few seconds or a few minutes to actually export everything. Okay, so I'm going to close that. All right, and you can see if I wanted to check on something again, you can go to view job status right here. So you can see my bar is moving across. Okay, so there we go. That's how you export something as an STL. Another good thing, so that's kind of for 3D printing. That's kind of the focus of what I imagine you'll do with that. And you can see it just finished. Let's say I have a nice sketch and I want to laser cut it. So that's another thing you might want to do. In that case, you can export one of these sketches as a DXF file. So the DXF file is going to save everything as a vector image. And that's what you want for the laser cutter. So you can use your DXF and bring it into Illustrator or another program, whatever you choose to use. And if you use those big lasers, then you'll have to use Illustrator. But whatever the case may be, you can click on any sketch. Let's say, I want this sketch. I want to laser cut this profile. So in that case, I can go to Save as DXF. I just right click on that sketch, Save as DXF, and there we go. Same sort of deal. So that's pretty great. It's very easy to manufacture your actual parts in Fusion, and that's a huge advantage when it comes to actually working on your projects. So I hope this is helpful. We went over a lot of stuff. I think this is a solid intro to Fusion. There's obviously a lot more, but this should give you a good idea of where to start and the kinds of things that you can use Fusion for. So hopefully this is helpful. Let me know if you have any questions or ask your respective studio leads. And yeah, I hope to see you guys on the next video. Thanks.